All right. Welcome, everyone. As always, we'll give it just a few minutes so people can start trickling in here. Zoom kind of allows you in at varying speeds, we've found. But thank you, everybody, for being here. This is the fifth in our monthly series of webinars where we try to cover all types of different topics and things that are very important, some that are obvious, some that are, sometimes overlooked. And I certainly don't think legacy planning, as you'll hear it called, or generational planning, there's a lot of different words for the same thing. Essentially, what happens to your assets when you're no longer here? I don't think that's overlooked. I think we all think about that at some point, but the steps needed to make a successful plan surrounding that, I do think gets overlooked. And the big piece, as we'll go through, is not just what you want to happen, but trying to get the people you care about or whoever stands to inherit something from you on the same page about what that means to you, what you hope it means to them. I think that's a piece that's often very much overlooked and something that, yes, you're going to be the one communicating that message, but that someone like me as a financial advisor can actually help you with and help you think about. So today, we've titled this How to Leave More Than Documents and Dollars, right? The proverbial mess for someone to clean up. It's a little bit about that, but it's also about how to instill the values by passing on an inheritance, not just of assets and a paper trail, essentially. So, again, most of you know me. If you don't, my name is Anthony Gerbi. I've been with Stein Financial Group for a decade plus now, and I'm a financial advisor. So I deal with all sorts of things from your regular, how do I invest my money to do well, to which has been challenging to an extent this year. The markets have been a little all over the place. Thankfully, this will not touch too much on the markets, although they've been a lot better. But it's nice to change up my day and not just talk about the markets all day every day. But I also deal with all sorts of different family situations, right? You can only imagine how many different types of families and types of people come in and meet with me. And I've got the experience to show, hey, this works for people or this doesn't work for people. And here's where I think you should go. So that's what we're going to go through today. One of the pieces, as I throw up a few disclosures, and I'll try to move out of the way a little bit here. One of the pieces that you may be familiar with that we've created that can help with this conversation is called our What If Workbook, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is a workbook. I think it's 40 some odd pages, might be even more than that. So it's thick. And Aaron has thankfully just linked it in the chat. So if you may have seen this before, if you're curious, click the link in the chat. Hopefully, it'll let you download it. Every once in a while, somebody says, it won't let me download it. It won't let me download it. It's probably, protections or something like that. It's just a PDF. If it won't let you download it, just send us a note in the chat and Aaron will make sure it gets emailed to you so that you do get it. But what it is a workbook that is designed for you to fill out, and it goes from everything in terms of, hey, where's the money at? How do we, where is which accounts have what, sort of nuts and bolts type things, to, hey, what are your values? What do you want to make sure the people you care about know as when you're no longer here? And it's sort of the break in case of emergency document. It's not to send back to us. We don't collect it back from you and scrutinize it or anything. It's purely for you. So it's a resource for, hey, the best way I've seen it used is, if there's kids in the picture, that's one of the usual situations. Hey, just so you know, if something happens to us, I'm saying this as the mom or dad in this equation, um, saying to the kids, something happens to us in the office, in our bedroom, in the closet, under this pile, there's a box. And in that box is this booklet. If something happens to us, this booklet's going to tell you what you need to know. Essentially, that's the idea behind it. So, for anybody who needs another copy or hasn't seen that before, again, it's in the chat. And let's get into exactly what today is going to be about. It's hard to have the talk, okay? And I don't even like necessarily framing it as the talk, as if it's Okay, everybody, family meeting, let's sit down for an hour and hash this out. It doesn't have to be that. That feels a little confrontational sometimes, especially for Minnesotans who tend to do everything a little bit more passive aggressively than that. But the communication is important, whether it's a structured talk or whether it's just, hey, I want to tell you a few things right now and I'll tell you more later. I have found that the best plans are the ones where the parents and this is there's going to be a lot of parents and children talk here. This is applicable even if you don't have kids. Now, hey, I get it if you're leaving all your money to charity or something like that, if there's any there. Um, then yes, you don't necessarily need to fill them in ahead of time. But if there's a person who stands to benefit potentially from your estate, that's a conversation you want to have at some point. And we'll talk about all the reasons why and how to do that. But that's a lot of what this is going to be about. And I see the note in the chat about not being able to see the workbook. So yes, Aaron will send that over to you. Um, so, and the other side of it, I think it's important to remember, and you may have dealt with this with your parents at some point. Uh, how do you bring it up to people who don't want to talk about it? If it's the parents who don't want to talk about it, right? Maybe either as parents or you're dealing with this with your parents, you don't want to commit to something ahead of time. Like, hey, I want you to understand how this inheritance thing will work, but it's not going to be something that I want you to plan on necessarily, right? It might be there, it might not. I always say there's kind of two different ways to plan to pass money on. There's one where it's very thoughtful and intentional, and yes, I've got this account, and that's going to be for the kids, and if that's the way you want to do it, more power to you. And the other way is that they should be so lucky. School of inheritance planning, right? If there's anything left after I'm done with it, sure, they can have that, but don't hold your breath, kids, right? So, and either one of those is totally fine. I tend to lean more towards the latter rather than the former. But you don't want to promise something or tell something and then all of a sudden it's not there anymore. If they depend on it, right? If you're like, well, hey, if everything works out like we hope it will, there's going to be some money there for you. You don't want them to put that, write it into their checking account right now and say, well, don't worry, I can spend the money I've got because I got more coming, right? That's just a bad way to go about the planning. So that's a worry that people have. And I've seen all these worries in reality. Um, so one of the biggest things, and a lot of this is a good example. A lot of what I'm going to talk about, there's going to be a lot of if thens today. Okay. And the if thens are because your families, your situations are all different. And I'm going to try to give advice that fits, sort of a general situation so you can all get something from it. But this is one of the biggest issues that people run into. I have two kids now. My two daughters are 2 and 4 months, so I don't actually know how responsible they're going to be yet. The toddler is as responsible as a toddler is at this point. But as my kids get older, I'm going to look at them and say, okay, if one of them has, God forbid, some problems, and I don't necessarily think it would be a good idea for them to inherit money if something were to happen in the short term, or at least inherit it in the same way as their sibling, now I've got unevenness, right? This also happens commonly with the types of assets you have. So if you have a house, for example, do you want your kids or whoever to inherit it equally? Well, that's tricky because what if they don't agree on what to do with the house? One of them wants to sell it, one of them wants to keep it. Now we're creating all these pressure points, right? And a good plan doesn't necessarily have to just eliminate pressure points. I think we do want to think about that. But sometimes the best decision is to treat kids unequally in terms of what they inherit. And that's tough to hear. And I get that that feels wrong on its face. And I'm not saying it's for everybody you need to do that, but for kids who are having problems, who maybe aren't great with money, again, I can make up 100 hypotheticals that I hope none of you have to experience, but I've seen them. They're not hypotheticals, they're real. There might be reasons to treat kids unequally. And that's going to feel weird, but it might be the best thing for them, even, not just for making this a smooth process. So I think, if one of those situations applies to you, you're probably thinking about it right now. But know that there are ways to do that in ways that can still be fair, just fair to the person, right? And I'll get into that more. I know I'm being vague, but we're kind of setting all this up. On the kids side, I mean, one of the things is just I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about what happens when you guys aren't here. Some people are okay talking about this. Some people are just like hands off. That is not a recipe for success because what that means is they're going to play catch up with all this stuff at the time something happens. We want to get them prepared ahead of time. They're afraid of bringing it up because they don't want to seem greedy. They don't want to seem like they're counting your money while you're still alive, right? That's another thing. And that's why it often has to be the parents that bring up this conversation because the kids, if this is the obstacle, are not going to want to, start counting your money for you, essentially. But that doesn't mean we can't have the conversation. And of course, one of the biggest reasons is, well, yeah, they've got their own stuff going on. They're not worried about the inheritance, but maybe they're a little underprepared for what the rules and what all that's going to be. So obviously, the solution is, well, let's talk about it. And now getting into some of the more concrete stuff, I set the table here. The things that you have the opportunity to do as the people, at least, who are going to potentially pass something on. And again, it's a potentially, but you're definitely hoping to pass something on, even if it's not financial, because one of the things that your assets can allow you to pass on is your values, your culture, your goals for what might happen with this money. I mean, a lot of people have been in my office saying, well, I want to leave this for the grandkids' education. That's fantastic. Maybe we can set it up so that you don't have to leave it to, well, the kids will figure out what to do with it, but I hope they use it for the grandkids' education, right? Maybe we can set it up so that you know that that's what will happen, right? Education, number three, which is called learn financial concepts. I'm just going to call that education. Huge one. People who don't know how the rules work can make mistakes with money that they inherit and not use it very efficiently. And I'm not just talking about spending it on something that you would rather, they save it or use it for something more noble. But I'm also talking about the rules surrounding inheritances, which I'll go through a little bit here. It can get pretty complicated, so we won't touch on every possible rule, but the big ones. Not knowing what those rules are, and if there's somebody who's like, yeah, hey, I know you worked with Anthony for many years, but Anthony's just going to send me the money and I'll figure it out. I do my best in those situations to make sure they know what all the rules are, and we try to take care of them like that. But they've got to be willing to open up and be educated, I guess is what I would say. And that goes hand in hand with preparing your beneficiary. So, step one, defining the family culture. There's a million stories I could tell you about this. Here are a bunch of keywords. You can, write some of these down. What's important to you as a family, especially if the money is going to be inherited by family members, but even if it's friends? One of the things that I really love to highlight that a couple of clients we work with do every year is they have started taking money out of their retirement accounts to donate to charity every year. And they have a family meeting every year, once a year. And this has to do with the required amount that you're required to take out of a retirement account once you're now 73. So they're required to take this money out, but you can donate it to charity. So they sit down with their family every year and say, all right, everybody, where should we donate to this year? And every year I look forward to it. I get a big spreadsheet in an email that says, all right, here's all the places we're going to donate to. And it's, the places you'd expect, local places, religious organizations, things like that. And then there's always a couple at the bottom that are the Sea Turtle Conservancy, the Giraffe Conservancy, um, the Little Free Bookshop, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But uh, I'm going off the top of my head. But it's a fantastic, not just act to give the money, right? That's on its surface, it's a good deed. But it sets the tone because the grandkids are involved, the kids are involved. Everybody sees what grandma and grandpa's values are here. And that is such a powerful precedent to set for someday if those family members do inherit some of this money. And knock on wood, it's not for a long time, but that potentially will happen. And knowing that that was the legacy that grandma and grandpa left is so powerful. You don't have to do it that way. Not everybody is going to give a chunk of money. Some of you need that money to live on. That's totally fair. But how can we start to set up those values ahead of time? Values like, some of these moral values here, I guess you could say, but even other things like education. Hey, we really would love to see this money go towards grandkids' education or your education as kids, right? Those are things that you could start now. Traditions, right? How do you want to instill that to the next generation? That could be holidays. How do you celebrate things? How do you remember people? Oh, every year I go to a florist and buy a nice bouquet and go put it on my grandma and grandpa's, plot at the cemetery. Um, I'm just spitballing, but that is the stuff that they're inheriting beyond just the assets, right? And I think that's too often overlooked. I know I'm edging into more of a personal conversation versus just a financial one. But those are the things that are a huge piece of the puzzle that I think all of you should start thinking about in terms of what do I want to pass on? Yeah, it's great if you can write a check and maybe help somebody with a down payment someday or just get them a little further ahead on their savings. But what was all that money for? What was important to you? Ultimately, money is what it helps us accomplish, right? It's nice to have a fun number in your bank account. It's nice to pull that up and look at it and say, okay, I feel secure there. But all that money is going to be used for something, ideally, right? And it should be used for things that you care about. And if you can pass that on to the next generation, that is a fantastic gift beyond just the financial part of it. So I'm throwing ideas out there, models of behavior, you know every one of you has a different answer for this. I think work hard is probably, we can all agree that's probably a good value to send, but everybody's different here. I'm not trying to tell you this is what you should be doing, but how can we do that? And then on the financial side, so let me take this into my world a little bit. There are ways in which you can set up the inheritance or the legacy that your kids or whoever will receive one day that sort of incentivizes this. So the first step is to communicate it ahead of time, right? But the second step is there are vehicles to pass money on where it's not just they get a check and it's their money and they can do whatever they want with it. I get this question all the time in terms of grandkids, right? Because grandkids, especially if they're under 18, you're like, well, let's see how life goes and whether we can really trust them to inherit a bunch of money. Um, Trusts are an option for that. Okay. Trusts allow you to have control over the money that you pass on to the next generation or whoever. Um, you can set rules in there and it can run the gamut from I would only like this to be used for education and shelter. Okay, so that's pretty blanket. You're not just going to go in and buy a fancy TV with this. This is going to be a down payment on a house. This is going to be rent. This is going to be college funds, right? You can be that restrictive on it. You can also say, hey, I want some of this money to go to the grandkids, but I want the parents, even though the grandkids are over 18, to be the trustee. So they're the gatekeeper on the money. So essentially, the grandkids still got to run it by their parents when they want to take money out of this account that they've inherited. That's another way to do it. There's even ways to do it where if you have one of those situations that is more problematic, somebody's not good with money, somebody's got chemical issues, somebody's, whatever the case may be, you can put stipulations in there to say, hey, these are the criteria that have to be, excuse me, that have to be met before access to the funds is given. So you can come down, this can be a conversation where, hey, I want to tell you a little bit about my values. I want to tell you about what I see happening with this money, but it'll be your choice in the end. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is you can go all the way in and set up a trust that specifically establishes what your rules are, and then that controls what happens with the money. So those are that spectrum from, hey, yep, you're going to get this money potentially, whatever's left again, and you get to decide. That's one way to do it. Or I decide, and when it passes, my rules are the rules. And there's pros and cons to each side of that strategy. It's an individual conversation. So family goals. Okay, here are the things you need to think about concretely. Okay, if you have minor children who stand to benefit from you, certainly if they're your children, but even if they're grandchildren and you want to pass something on specifically to grandchildren, um, make sure that if you're in a position to be a guardian for them, that you've got a backup guardian put in place. You would most likely do this in your will Your will allows you to set guardians. I know from experience, I have two daughters now. We did our will about a year and a half ago, I want to say. My wife and I. And one of the things, we basically said, yeah, we want everything to go to our, at the time, one daughter. Or if we have future kids, that it be split. It's going to be pretty straightforward. But one of the things we needed to pick was, who will the guardians be if something happens to both me and my wife, right? Who do we want those people to be? And then who are the backups to them? If you're in a position where you're caring for a minor, making sure that who the guardian is and who that is spelled out can be very important, especially as families are mixed these days. And, there's a lot of things where you want to be thinking about that, essentially. Um, and secondly, life insurance. Now, by the time you're retired, you generally don't need as much life insurance as you do when you're in your prime working years, right? A lot of people, like I have life insurance that will cover my mortgage and more if something should happen to me, that will give my wife and now two daughters a good leg up to live. It was not going to, set them up for life, but it's going to give them a good leg up if something were to happen to me. When you're retired, you don't necessarily need that because you've got all your retirement savings. You're like, well, if something happens to me, I've got um I've got things, money left over that'll just pass on, and everybody else is an adult potentially. Again, every family is a little bit different. But is there a benefit to having some life insurance? If you would like to pass on some money, maybe that's a more efficient way of doing it than just saying, well, this account over here is earmarked for the grandkids. Maybe it's better to use that account to pay the premium on a life insurance policy that will pay out to the grandkids. There's tax reasons to do that potentially, although inheritance can be pretty tax friendly anyway. But that is something that I think is a little overlooked. Again, the life insurance piece. Let me give you a concrete example. Oh, and there is a question. Let me answer the question. I'll give you a concrete example here. If you have a trust, can you update it by drawing a line through it and initial it, or do you need to go back to the attorney? Um, it's a good question. I'm not an attorney. If it were, I wouldn't say, I would be surprised if that was just as good. I would probably go back to the attorney, especially if it's a simple enough change that you do want to just draw a line through something, right? You're not rewriting a whole section, but it's just, hey, I wanted to just cross one thing out. I would think most attorneys, especially ones who drew this up originally, would probably not charge you all that much for that. I'm speculating there. It obviously depends on what you're looking to do. I wouldn't trust that drawing a line through it. I'm not saying it's impossible that it could work. I'm not an attorney, so I couldn't give you a definitive answer. I would be nervous about doing that personally. I would rather work with an attorney, especially if the same one that drafted your trust can um, go back through and amend it. And it depends on what kind of trust it is, too, by the way, because there's revocable and irrevocable, and irrevocable, as the name kind of implies, means now this is kind of set in stone, and if you want to amend it, it gets pretty complicated and difficult. So it depends on the type of trust, first of all. But secondly, even if it can be amended, I'd rather work with an attorney to make sure it is set up correctly. And that is a very key point, by the way, before I get to my example. Both for wills and trusts, as life circumstances change, remember to update those things. And I'm not just talking about as your finances change. I'm talking about, oh, we had the kids as the beneficiaries, but the kids just got divorced. And we had the spouse and the ex-spouse now as a beneficiary. That's not super common. Mostly you're putting your kids because they're always going to be your kids. But remember, as families change, as situations change, you may want to go revisit some of that stuff, especially in wills that says, ooh, I don't know if I want this person to inherit this much money anymore. Um, don't let that linger until it's, late in the game and now you're scrambling to change all that stuff. Okay. That's one thing that gets overlooked. And one of the most common ones is as families change, divorces happen, remarriages happen, grandkids are born, um, all that stuff. Make sure to factor that in as the situation changes. Also, if you move states, that can be a big one that gets overlooked, especially for wills. You don't necessarily have to change your will, but you might want to talk to somebody about, hey, I'm in a new state, I'm in Florida versus Minnesota. Is there anything that my will, should be changed to reflect different state laws? So the life insurance example. In Minnesota, there is a rule about estate tax. And well, in most states, there's rules about estate tax. There's a federal rule about estate tax. What the rule is what matters here. Federally, almost nobody pays federal estate taxes because per person, we each get $13 million of exemption. So, in other words, for a married couple, your estate would have to be over 26 million now for you to pay any estate tax on it. Now, that doesn't mean that the assets themselves, when the people inherit them, aren't taxed. A lot of them are. But the actual estate tax, which is a separate tax, most people don't pay that on the federal level. In Minnesota, estate tax, the exemption is $3 million per person. But there's also another big difference. The federal tax, I told you, was 13 million roughly per person. And you, for a couple, then it's 26. And the federal estate tax is something it's called portable, meaning if I die, my wife gets my 13 million of exemption for when she passes and my kids inherit everything. So that makes the total bar again 26. In Minnesota, that 3 million per person is not portable. So again, concrete example, if I die and I then leave all my money to my wife, or all of our household assets go to my wife, which is how I have it set up, she gets everything, and it's, a spouse is actually a really easy to inherit from. There's special rules for spouses that make it even smoother than a non-spouse. But when she passes away then and passes it to our daughter, she only gets 3 million as an exemption. She does not get the full 6 that we would both have had if we both passed at the same time, for example. Now, why is this important? Well, as you get older and as your assets continue to grow, and this is everything, remember, not just your investment accounts, but your house, any other assets you have, any real estate you have, any valuables you have, all of that is what's counted here. As an estate gets closer potentially to 3 million, and I realize not everybody's estate's going to get to 3 million, and that's totally fine. But for those of you it's close, we might be looking at a situation where, yeah, if it happened that way, you might have to pay some estate tax. Maybe one of the ways to work around that is to use some of those assets up front and buy, for example, a life insurance policy, right? So you're drawing down your estate on the front end, but you're giving a tax-free inheritance, because life insurance payouts are tax-free. You're giving a tax-free inheritance to another person in the future. So keep that in mind. That's one of the strategies potentially that we can employ. And again, having an estate that's close to $3 million, good problem to have. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just it adds a new variable to the situation. So, college planning for kids. One of our most common questions, or grandkids. Did you know that you do not have to be the parents of the child in order to open up a college savings plan for them? Okay. You can open it up as a grandparent, or if the parents open it and it's a 529 plan, and those are probably the most common ones, at least in the US here, where a 529 plan, 529 just stands for the part of the tax code that allows for this, kind of like a 401k, same principle. But it allows anyone, friends, family, acquaintances, to add money to the account on behalf of a child or a person. They can't even be over 18. Um, the growth on that money, then if it's used for higher education, even private high school, is tax free when you take it out. So, a couple key things I just said there. One, anyone can add to it. So, if you've got grandkids who have a 529 open, and you're like, well, that's for the parents to contribute. No, you could contribute to that too. And a lot of people overlook that. Secondly, the tax benefit of it is that the growth is not taxable if it's used for education expenses. It's not that you get to contribute and that comes off your tax bill. Everything you contribute, you're still going to be taxed on. There is in Minnesota a small tax credit you can get for it. It's not a lot, but it's a little bit. So people always ask, do I get a tax benefit for saving that way? Yeah, but it's not very big. So it's not going to make a huge difference on your taxes. It'll make some difference, but not a lot. But it can be super impactful for the kids down the road. It's better to set these up when the kids are young because then that gives the maximum amount of time for it to grow before they need it. And again, the growth is where you're really getting the tax benefit here. But again, remember that you can contribute even if you're not the parent here. Um, and one of the things that I like to key in on for people we work with is how do we build a legacy while you're still here? We'll talk about that more as I go through the rest of this, but how you can do things with your money that maybe you were going to set aside for someone to inherit. Why not do that stuff now? We'll talk about, like a vacation. That's one of the slides coming up here is talking about vacations, but I'll mention it now. Or college savings. If you were going to leave this money, well, I'd love it to be used for my grandkids' education. Maybe you can help out with that right now. That's where somebody like me comes in and says, hey, I think we could afford to do this without handicapping your own financial future, right? Because I think the next question people ask is, hey, I'd love to do that or take the whole family on a vacation or something like that. But I'm a little nervous that I'd be using money that I might need later on. And totally fair. That's a real worry. Somebody like me can help you figure out whether that money is going to be likely needed or whether, no, actually, I think you've got some money to play with here. Why not do some of this stuff while you're around to see and ideally the smile on their faces, right? And again, I'm talking a lot about kids and grandkids, but this could be charitable giving too. You might want to give to your alma mater or a charitable organization that you like and actually see what they end up doing with some of that money, or see the benefits of it played out during your lifetime. That is a great goal. We can try to make that happen or see what your capacity to make that happen is. That's another piece that's often overlooked here. Home ownership. So the common thing where this really goes is I want to help my kid, my grandkid, my friend, my niece, my nephew, whoever, with their down payment on their new house. Okay. And it's a totally noble thing to do. When somebody tells me that, I often have some questions. Number one, like I've had people come in and say, hey, my kid is moving in with their fiance and they want to buy a house. And not to be the sourpuss or the rain on your parade, but one of the questions I ask is, okay, yeah, I think you've got the money potentially to help with the down payment. Who's going to own that house? Is it going to be jointly owned? Is it only your kid that's going to own it? Is the other side's parents chipping in some money too here? Because again, I hate to be always thinking about the worst case scenario, but what if we chip some money in and then they don't get married or they get divorced one day and now they're fighting over that house and you've got some of your money tied into it, right? Are there ways to benefit them that don't do that? So I'm not trying to be negative, but when I see this, that's one of the first questions I often ask. Okay, tell me about this. How is it structured? But helping with that is something that potentially a lot of you could actually do to some extent. It's going to, again, different for everybody, depends on your circumstances. Disclaimer, 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 right? But that is absolutely something that we should be looking at. Maybe you can help with that. Maybe you can help get the next generation set up for either home ownership or just a better living situation. This is not super common. I won't spend a ton of time on this. It is absolutely possible to do loans within the family. Um, I think, if the younger generation is able to successfully get this, they should be so lucky, again, is how I look at it. But if you've got someone in your family who's a business startup is one example, but again, obviously they need some money. And a lot of people would say, well, if I'm in a position to help, I'll just give it to them. And it's sort of an advance on their inheritance as long as it's financially feasible for me. That's totally fine. Know that you can do it in the form of a loan too. You can write out terms. There can even be interest or not. But if you want to make it a little more concrete, that's an option. I think that's, again, I've been saying this a lot, but that's something that does get overlooked is it doesn't just have to be a gift. There are ways to benefit someone via a loan that you don't have to involve the bank in. Vacations are huge, right? People retire and they love to travel. I mean, whenever any of you come in to see me, I'm always asking, where have you been lately? What have you been doing? Um, you may be a traveler, you may not be. I'm not saying everybody should be or shouldn't be. But if you are, and we can find a way to make the finances part of it work. Wouldn't it be great to do a family vacation? Again, if you want to think about it as quote unquote an advance on an inheritance, that's one way to think about it. But make those memories while you're still here. Again, I hammer this home quite a bit, but it's so impactful. It's one thing to leave somebody a nice pot of money that you didn't end up needing and it's inheritance, right? That's one thing. But what if you could make those memories? What if you could spend time with the grandkids while you are still here? That's going to be worth way more than the money down the road. And if it's a nice vacation to boot, then everybody is going to like that too. But how can we use some of your money responsibly to do those things? I'll tell you a story about this is kind of related to inheritance. It's a little more just how to use money effectively, which is part of the story. But we have a client we work with, a woman in her 80s, got a bunch of grandkids, and one of the grandkids was having a destination wedding in Italy. The very fancy, very expensive wedding. And the grandmother was, of course, invited. And she was like, I think I'm gonna go do it. And she's amazing for her age. I mean, she gets around great. She was totally gonna be capable of doing this. So I was like, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. You should absolutely do this. I asked her, and she's in a position where she's got some assets to work with. In fact, I kind of harp on her to spend a little more than what she's been spending currently. But we sat down and we talked about it. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited for you. That sounds like an awesome trip. Have you ever, I said, let me ask you this. Have you ever flown first class before? And she said, oh my gosh, of course not. That's such an extravagance. And by the way, I haven't flown first class either. So I'm not, coming at this like, oh, you have to, you can't not. But I looked at her and I said, look, I'm the guy who looks at the numbers here, and I'm telling you, I think you should. I think this is going to be a great trip. I think you've earned it. You've been very responsible with your money. I think you should do it. And she said, oh, I'll think about it, but I don't know. That's not really me. That's not really me. And I just met with her again a couple weeks ago, maybe even longer than that ago, but recently and since the wedding. And she's like, oh my gosh, we went and it was such a great time. And it was a beautiful, I was so lucky to be able to go. And we upgraded to Comfort Plus. And I said, well, it's not quite first class, but I like the effort that you made there. And doing stuff like that, I know that was a her expense, not a legacy thing. So I'm veering off topic a little bit, but it's all in the same vein. How can we use what you've done a great job in accumulating to benefit you and the next generation, even while you're still here? Yes, it's important to get things set up for when you're not here anymore, but doing the stuff while you're here is incredibly important. So I like to tell that story, and I was thankful that she at least partially took me up on the offer. Um, Let me go into some rules here very quickly. You may want to get a pen and pad out if you really are scrupulous like that. If not, know that you could just pick up the phone and call Anthony and say, "Hey, can you remind me what this is?" How to pass on IRAs or other retirement plans. Now, other retirement plans would be your deferred comp through the county, 457 accounts. That's what deferred comp through the county is. That would be 403Bs, 401Ks, even Roth IRAs fit the same thing. Those type of accounts, you can set beneficiaries on. Okay. Beneficiaries is a term, which essentially means you write in who you want to inherit this account if you're no longer here. There are two types of beneficiaries, primary and contingent. Primary beneficiaries, and you can have multiple of each, who inherit, or what, it can be organizations too, um, who inherit the assets if you die. That's primary beneficiaries. And you can break it down by percentages. You can have five, you can have one, whatever. Or you can have 15. Um, Contingent beneficiaries are who inherits the money if your primary beneficiaries are no longer around, essentially. So if they predeceased you and you didn't get a chance to update things, or if you pass at the same time, potentially. Pretty rare that contingent beneficiaries actually come into play. Again, most of the time, if God forbid one of your primary beneficiaries were to pass away before you, you'd just change your beneficiaries then, and because you can always change them. So pretty rare, but it's nice to have as a backup. So you can set these beneficiaries. What that means is, like, I'll give you an example. If you work with us, If you work with us and you have an IRA or it's your old deferred comp plan or whatever it is, and you pass away, your kid or whoever is going to call us up and say, "Hey, unfortunately, mom or dad passed away here." We'll say, obviously, very sorry to hear that, all the normal stuff. But then when it comes to the account, we'll say, okay, what we need are a copy of the death certificate and then ID for the person who is calling to make sure that they're the person who is set as the beneficiary. Okay. Once that's done, we say, great, here's how it works. If you inherit a pre-tax IRA or a Roth IRA or a retirement account, you have 10 years over which to withdraw the balance of that account. Okay. It's a 10-year rule. It didn't used to be like this. This changed a few years ago. So that's why I try to reiterate it. 10 years. Now, if it's a pre-tax account, if it's an IRA or deferred comp or 401k, obviously anything that you, as the inheritor, take out is taxable. So when you're having these conversations with the kids, make sure that they understand that yes, you are going to have to pay taxes on these retirement dollars that I have. We would obviously help them understand that as well, but it's nice that they know it going in. Now, it's not like they're going to have to cough up money from their own pockets to pay it. They'll just pay the taxes out of the inheritance itself. So again, they're still coming out ahead here. But just know that yes, taxes are part of the equation, and that 10-year rule is very important. The best way in general to go about doing that is taking it out in 10 equal chunks. Because essentially what you're doing is you're spreading out that taxable event over 10 years as evenly as possible. And that's what matters for income taxes, right? It's the year, the calendar year. So, and again, we help with all of that. We don't need to get too into the weeds on that, but I find as you're having those conversations, or maybe it's like, hey, I'm not well versed in this, but I'd like you to sit down with Anthony so he can brief you on all the stuff that we've got set up and how it will affect you one day. I'm more than happy to do that as well. So know that that's an option. But getting them prepared for it, yes, there are going to be some taxes here. Now, if it's a Roth IRA, there's no taxes because that's all after tax to begin with, but it's still subject to the 10-year rule. A lot of people don't realize that. So after 10 years, all those accounts got to be empty and that money has to be sent over to the beneficiaries, however many there are. Not a bad thing, good thing. I mean, they should be so lucky to have that, but there are rules to follow, excuse me. One of the things you should know about beneficiaries, some of you know this, I know I'm reviewing for some of you, but not everybody does. Beneficiaries on your retirement plans supersede your will. Okay. So I've talked a little bit about wills. When you set the people that you want to inherit things in your will, what you're doing is you're setting where all of your property and assets that don't have beneficiaries on them, that's where that will go. The things that do have beneficiaries on them, those go according to the beneficiaries. It's written right into the policy where they should go. The benefit of that is then it doesn't go through probate. Anything in your will that is going according to the will, not according to that it has beneficiaries on it, is subject to probate. I say this every time I mention probate. Probate gets a bad rap. It's not nearly as bad as the horror stories you've heard about it. It's usually pretty straightforward, especially in Minnesota, from what I've heard. I'm not a probate attorney, but from what I've heard, not bad. There are a couple of drawbacks, though, to probate. Number one, for those of you who care, anything that goes through probate can potentially become public information. Somebody could go into court records once it's all settled and look up what transferred. Some of you may care about that, some of you may not. I personally don't really care. I guess at this point, maybe I will in the future, but to each their own. I'm not saying it's wrong to care about that. Secondly, it's just a process to do it. It's not necessarily hard, but if you have assets that are not easily split, again, houses, for example, the probate process isn't hard, but it's figuring out what's going to happen with that asset that can be annoying. Where the probate process where you hear those horror stories are when somebody says, "No, mom and dad promised this to me." And you say, "Well, no, that's not how it's written in the will." And then people try to contest the will or something like that. I mean, again, not to, I'll tell you a story. We've got somebody we work with whose sister passed away, and there's two other sisters. So there were three sisters total. One passed away. The other one is the responsible one, I'll call her, is our client. And then there's a third one. And she's got a few issues without going into detail. The third one, as it turns out, the irresponsible one was left out of the will completely by the sister who passed away. Only the responsible one, our client, was put in the will. That was tricky for the our client to navigate because she was dealing with the estate and the other sister was like, "No, no, no, I some of this is coming to me, right?" And she had to say, "Well, unfortunately, no." And she's like, "No, that can't be right. I don't believe you. Let me see a copy of the will." And she asked me, she said, "Well, what do I do? I mean, the will is pretty clear. It lays it out." I was like, "Well, it's kind of up to you. You could just say, well, let's sit down and go through it together and I'll show you." And that might be what a lot of people would do. But I also said, look, if she's really that concerned about it, some of this stuff is going to go through probate. She'll be able to look at the will after it goes through probate. So if you just want to kind of sit back and do everything you're supposed to do everything right, but just saying, hey, you'll see it when it comes out in the wash, essentially, you can do that too. So I say this to give you a few examples about the probate process. Where it can go well is what it does for most people. It goes smoothly for most people. Every once in a while, there's a problem. And so some of you may want to consider adding beneficiaries to assets that might not have them currently. That's kind of where I'm going with this. And the assets that are most common that don't have beneficiaries on them are bank accounts and your house. Okay. Did you know that you can add beneficiaries to both your bank accounts and your house? Not both your bank accounts like you have two, but both bank accounts and houses can have beneficiaries. The way you do that, bank accounts, you just go into the bank and say, I want to turn my bank accounts into what's called payable on death, POD. And they'll give you a form to do. And essentially, what all that does is it just adds a beneficiary to your checking, savings, whatever other accounts you have there. And then, same process as they would with us with your investment accounts. They show up to the bank, they bring the death certificate, they bring their ID, and they say, great, you're the beneficiary. We're going to just put this in an account in your name now, essentially. Um, the house, the property part of the equation, the term you're looking for is called a transfer on death deed. Okay, TOD deed. And you can go to most likely your county office. I'm sure it's a little different in different states, but in Minnesota, it's the county office, and talk with basically the registrar there about property and deeds and say, I want to turn my property, my house into, I want to do it a transfer on death deed. And that is exactly what it sounds like. You've now got beneficiaries on your house. These will then not go through probate. They will go directly in ownership to whoever you want it to be. And it can help save a step. So for a lot of people, that might be sufficient. You might not need to do a fancy trust or a big will. You might be able to just set things up that way and make it streamlined for the next generation. And by the way, that's not required necessarily. Long-term care obviously can be a big drain on your finances, right? So that's one of the things we want to think about ahead of time. We are actually doing our next event next month is going to be about long-term care specifically. And at the end here, there'll be a poll that you can ask to be pre-registered for that. So I'll put that up at the end. But I won't go into it in a ton of depth right now since we're going to do it. What I'll say is not everybody needs long-term care insurance, but everybody needs to have a long-term care plan. That might be using your savings, but taking that burden off the kids to figure out is A, such a great gift, and B, something that I think everybody should think about. Philanthropy. I already used that example of the family who sits down every year and figures out which charities they want to go with. Not everybody does that. That's okay. Everybody's different. But if there is a cause that's very important to you, is there a way to get the family kickstarted on continuing it on after you're no longer here, right? The simple way is just, well, you can make that cause a beneficiary of your own and say, yeah, I want to send them some money and I'll just do it myself. But if you can get the kids or the grandkids started with them, maybe set up a donation in their name or something like that, maybe you can instill that value for the rest of their life too. And wouldn't that be a great gift to them to remember you every time they support this great cause that you believed in so much? So again, we can help with that. Learning financial concepts, a lot of this stuff is pretty self-explanatory. Budget obviously keeps you on track. We can help you with that. I always say, by the way, And this comes in when I do financial plans for people and I ask, well, what do you think you spend in a given month? And if you're like me, you're like, well, less than I bring in. That's the important part, right? Yes. If we're in the black, not in the red every month, that's a good start. If you need help trying to figure out what you're spending for any reason, whether it's planning or whatever, um, I tend to recommend go a month or two and try to put everything you possibly can on a credit card. All right. And that sounds like weird advice. I'm not saying you pay the interest on it, pay it off at the end of the month so you don't get any interest. But the credit card will track it for you, essentially, is why I'm saying it. So please don't take that as Anthony says I should just put all my expenses on credit cards and not worry about it. No, no, no. Pay it off at the end of the month. I don't want you to pay any interest. But if you need a little help tracking that, that's a great way to do it. Have the credit card company track it for you, essentially. Question: does a transfer on death value still count as total of estate value? Yes. As far as estate taxes go, yes. Essentially, it doesn't change what they're inheriting. It just changes the legal method they're inheriting it through, is the way I would put it for that transfer on death deed. Same thing for accounts, by the way. Now, there are some special rules about inheriting um, non-retirement accounts. Remember, I said the 10-year rule applies to that retirement account, right? But the inheriting a home or a non-retirement account has different rules attached with it. Maybe since that question kind of spurred it, I'll go through those really quickly. If you inherit an asset that's not a retirement account, you get what's called a step up in cost basis. At least if it's, life insurance and annuities are a little bit different, although this applies to a lot of annuities too. But, like a regular investment account that's not an IRA or a Roth IRA, a house, you get what's called a step up in cost basis. Cost basis is just a fancy term for what did your parents or whoever you're inheriting from buy this asset for originally? If it's an investment, what was the share price on the day they bought it and how much did they buy? If it's a house, what did they buy the house for? Now, for a lot of people who might be passing on real estate at some point, you might say, well, this house was bought 50 years ago for $20,000 and now it's worth 400 or something like that. Okay, well, there's a lot of gain in there, right? If you're inheriting that asset, your gain of that difference between the cost and what the current value is stepped up. So the IRS says, as far as we're concerned, you as the inheritor bought that house for $400,000. So if you turn around and sell it tomorrow, you have zero gain if you sell it for 400. Now, if you hold on to it for a few years and it grows from there, then you will have a gain, but it'll be the gain above and beyond 400,000, not the original 20,000 that it was bought for. So it's very tax efficient to inherit assets like that. This is a big reason why I'm not always a fan of, hey, I want to put the house in my kid's name while I'm still alive. And sometimes that's done in order to try to avoid healthcare expenses, right? Hey, they can't force me to sell my house to pay for my long-term care if it's in my kid's name. In general, yes, although there is a 5-year look back on that, so you got to be pretty planful about it. But if you just gift it to your kids, you or anybody, they don't get that step up in cost basis. So if they do turn around and sell it someday, they might be on the hook for quite a bit of taxes on it, depending on if it's their primary residence. There's exemptions on that, and that's a whole world. I won't get into all that right now because we don't have time. But the step up in basis upon inheriting an asset is huge for tax purposes. So don't necessarily be in a hurry to send that stuff out ahead of time, I would say, because it could change their tax status down the road, essentially. Um, I just talked about taxes. I think we're covered there. IRAs and retirement plans. One of the things that people ask me about as it relates to the next generation is, can I help my kids, my grandkids, my niece, my nephew get started on investing? Can I contribute to an IRA for them? And the answer is you cannot directly contribute to an IRA for them. You can't just start the account and then put their name on it. You can send them the money to contribute to it. Now, that does require, and I point this out to people, a little bit of trust where, yes, you send them the money and then they contribute. That's totally fair. That's totally fine, as long as they're eligible to contribute in the first place, which means they're earning money from a job, even if that job doesn't have a retirement plan itself. As long as they're earning income, they can contribute to an IRA. And it's a great idea. And we absolutely help people do that. But remember, when you send them the money, they still have to be the ones who authorize the contribution. Not that this happens a lot, but they could take the money and say, "Oh, I'll contribute half of that, and the rest of that will go towards a new TV," again, to use a crude example. So it's not really a problem. Most people are pretty thankful and say, "Oh yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it." But just remember who you're dealing with, I guess is the way to put it. We can set it up. I do have this set up with a couple people currently where the benefactor or the person we work with is wiring money directly every first of the month into their, in this case, it's a niece and nephew's account. And then the niece and nephew's account has an automatic contribution into their investment account set up. So it's all wireless. It's all just automatic. And they don't even have to think about it. That's a great way to do it. We could help you set that up if that's something you'd like to do. And by the way, it doesn't even have to be an IRA or a Roth IRA. It could be a regular old investment account, and then you don't even have limits to worry about for savings. Again, they should be so lucky to get that benefit from you, I would say. But if that's something that you would like to do, talk to us and we can help you figure out what the best way to do it for you and for them is. Um, Understanding investments, risk reward, passing that on is important, but everybody's different there. Okay. And we're getting close to time, so I am wrapping up here. Um, but what to do first, retitle. So this is kind of your checklist here, essentially. What should you do if you haven't even started on this? You should potentially retitle accounts. And that doesn't mean you're putting your accounts in your kids' names, but if you have a trust, should the account be in the trust name or not? Now, you may say, I have no idea, Anthony, I don't even have a trust. Well, number one, then we should talk about whether a trust makes sense for you or not. But number two, if you do have a trust, then we can talk about whether we should retitle the accounts or not. And we can help you with all that. Um, Secondly, how to take withdrawals in a tax advantaged manner. This matters for you because it's going to help maximize the amount of money not only you have later in life, but also that you potentially pass on. So, how to take withdrawals in a tax advantaged manner. This is why it's incredibly important that we have an understanding of your tax situation. Some of you may have seen recently that we sent out a request for, hey, everybody who's done their taxes so far this year, if you've got an extension, you may not have done it yet. But everybody who is done, send us a copy of your taxes. We'll run a report for you, and that will help us when you do want to take money out, take it out, especially if you have multiple accounts. Take it from the most advantageous account for your taxes that we can possibly. That's one of the big things that we can help you do. And it allows you to save money for the long run, either for you or for the future generations. And how to manage your inheritance to potentially preserve and protect assets for the future. I would say that goes both ways. That goes for inheritance that you might leave for someone someday, as well as inheritance that you might receive yourself. How do we handle that in the best way? That 10-year IRA rule that I talked about, that applies to you too if you inherit it from a parent, at least if they passed away recently. Let's make sure that you're following the right rules so that we're maximizing the good that that asset can do for you or for the next generation. So it's not hard. It's eating the elephant, I would say, to do this stuff. You take it one bite at a time. Don't let yourself get overwhelmed and have to feel like you have to do it all at once. Take a bite off at a time. I promise there's time to get this done. Okay. We can do family meetings if that would be helpful. Bring the kids in, talk with us if you work with us currently, and say, hey, Anthony, can you just break down everything I've got for the kids? Or you and I can even meet beforehand and say, hey, I want them to know the high level stuff. They don't need to know the nitty gritty. They don't even need to know the balances. I just want you to tell them what you told me about IRAs when they inherit them one day. We can do that too. Everybody's family is different. But preparing them to receive and manage their inheritance is crucial because that is something that a lot of times the inheritors are underprepared for. And that doesn't mean bad things are going to happen, but it opens the door to bad things, like them not using the money as effectively as it could. So, family meetings, we are more than happy to do this with you to help you get this figured out or to sit down with you and your kids together. I'll leave it open for questions. We're right at the top of the hour, so I really appreciate everybody for joining. I hope you learned something or a couple things, ideally, maybe more than a couple, and that it spurred your thinking in terms of what this could be for you and your family going forward. So thank you, everybody, for the time. We'll see you next month.